Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of the Semoto Podcast. Today here with us Manuel Fajardo from Plenitude Consulting, one of the early members of the Semoto ecosystem and a consulting company that is dually located in both UK and France. Welcome, Manuel.
Thank you so much, Marco, and really appreciate the pronouncing the surname properly.
Pleasure having you today, Manuel. So, Manuel, thanks for being here with us. Tell us more about yourself and later about Plenitude. I mean, what brought you to crypto in the first place?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one because I guess that I will be very direct. What brought me to crypto in the first place was greed. I guess that like we all have those stories about when Bitcoin was doing crazy price hikes. Back in my case, it was back in 2016. Somebody told me about it. I went to a Tottenham Court Road ATM, put 40 quid, 6 cents for 40 quid. Can you imagine the price at the time? It went up like crazy. I didn't hold it. I'm not a millionaire, a Bitcoin millionaire, but something, I was like, wait a minute, there's something here. And I think that, that was kind of, the beginning of the rabbit hole. I think that, of course, then you start to get more deeply into it and you get to know kind of the principles behind Bitcoin and what makes it so special, the fact of having decentralized, non-state issued money. Then, it was the time when, Ethereum was new. So, so I started discovering about smart contracts and all that you could do with them. And that's when, there was a real eye-opener. And I was like, okay, wait a minute, this can have a lot of potential to transform a lot of industries, And we saw it with DeFi and we saw it with NFTs, etc. So it has been a kind of an 8-year-old story, so far in my case. But, I've spent a lot of time, digging deep into it, understanding what makes an ecosystem different from another one, appreciating the trade-offs that they do in terms of technology, tokenomics, governance, etc. So it has been really fascinating. And to speak up, my professional career has always been in asset management. I'm a TradFi compliance person. I started back in 2004. Been moving from Paris to London to the US, back to Paris, always in compliance and internal control roles. And I think that, that there was a time where basically, after having invested some parts of my savings in crypto, I decided to do the same with my career. Basically, you could very clearly see that crypto was going to be regulated, just like traditional finance. And I thought that it was the right moment to say, okay, let's anticipate that. Let's use the experience that I have accumulated in TradFi, and let's apply this to this new world and this new regulation that is coming in.
You must have, thanks for that, but you must have seen an interesting background and also some interesting changes from when you join, how regulation was in crypto to what it is these days. I guess is a completely different world.
Absolutely. Basically being in compliance in TradFi, it was so funny or shocking. You can use whichever word you say, but that how at the time in 2017 you could still create accounts with a password and a username, and that was it. And you could get accounts with all of the exchanges at the time. And also interesting to see how little by little you started to get those emails from the exchanges saying, hey, we have to comply with KYC rules. And of course you have to comply with KYC rules. We knew that it was a matter of time until that started arriving. So it has been like that, like basically seeing how, the industry has had to raise its game. So I think that, back to the question about, Plenitude, Plenitude is a firm that is also kind of doing a similar path in the sense of saying, this is a consulting firm that has always specialized in financial crime compliance, AML, sanctions, market abuse, fraud, things like that, but always serving a TradFi client base. And it was funny that, that they were also kind of, going through that same path of saying, okay, there's a new sector emerging here. It makes sense to have a digital assets practice and basically apply all that experience to helping crypto firms comply with all of this regulation because we have been there, we know how it is, we know what regulators expect, etc. So basically Plenitude and I were kind of going through that same thinking about, how it was needed to have somebody that bridges that TradFi world with the crypto world. And then, it was a good match and basically, that's when I joined. And
it's great, and we love to see well-established TradFi companies opening the doors and moving into the space first of all, hiring experts like yourself, and then serving the business more and more. So tell us more about Plenitude. I mean, what are the aspects that you specialize on? What you guys cover when it comes to consulting? Is regulation a 360, or do you cover something in particular?
So we are compliance experts, and I think that that's kind of the thing that that kind of sets Plenitude apart from other consulting firms is that we don't aim to do everything. I cannot help you if it's strategy or or management consulting. That's not our area. We are compliance consultants. A lot of what the firm does is really focus on the financial crime area because that's kind of one of the areas of compliance that moves more. AML sanctions, the regulators are very active in those areas. Market abuse, fraud, and other things. But I cover pretty much the whole range of compliance topics. For example, financial promotions, conflicts of interest, governance, those areas basically. As long as it touches on compliance, it's things that we can cover. I think that the type of engagement that we do, they're a little bit different depending on who we're working at. I use a lot the image of a bridge, basically, of the bridge between crypto and TradFi, and basically it works a little bit different whether you're working on a firm on one side of the bridge or on the other side of the bridge. And I'll explain. Basically, some of the clients that I've had are TradFi firms. And they're looking at the crypto world saying, okay, I run a fund that invests in equities. Now I want to invest in crypto. How do I change my due diligence approach, for example? How do I change my onboarding process, my KYC process? Or in the case of crypto firms, is the other way around. It's basically, okay, I'm new to this. I know that now I know how to comply with regulation. How do I design a compliance framework? And basically, in one case, you're starting with something that already exists because you're already regulated, and it's just a matter of tweaking it to respond to the risks of the crypto business model. But in the case of the crypto firms, it's usually more like, okay, good, I'm starting from scratch, or I have something that is very recent. How do I bring it out to the level that regulators expect?
Interesting. Thanks for that. And actually, I would like to come back to this. I love the metaphor of the bridge because not many companies have the level of expertise of Plenitude, and they see both of a player crossing this bridge, financial company moving into crypto and crypto companies getting more regulated at the same level as TradFi one. So let's go back to that one in a second. But first of all, and this is going to be extremely interesting for our audience, you are exposed to two different jurisdictions, and you are one of the experts that not only understand what's going on in the UK, but in Europe as well. You are based in France, you also operate from there, you have plenty of experience. So tell us both, from your point of view, obviously, when we analyze these two jurisdictions, UK and France in particular, what are the main difference when it comes to regulation? There are new things, new rules coming into place that we should be aware of? Give us an idea.
Yeah, I think that that exactly. Just like we have this question about bridge between TradFi and crypto, it's also means sometimes that we're also kind of playing that role of bridge between one side of the channel and the other, and it's fascinating because like we are members of industry associations in both sides. For example, ADAM in France and Crypto UK in the UK, and it's fascinating to see how the discussions that are being had on one side and the other sometimes are common, but sometimes are completely different. In the sense of saying, for example, to give you an example, one of the big things that is coming to the EU later this year is MiCA, and we can get into MiCA later, but also the travel rule, for example. And basically we have a lot of discussions in the EU about, okay, how to prepare, how to adopt those challenges. The UK had those discussions 1 year ago because, travel rule has been enforced in the UK since last September. So that's been very interesting because basically, those discussions that we've been having with UK players and with the industry association, now we can use those teachings, and those experiences to basically say, okay, how can we assist clients on the other side of the bridge? On the other hand, for example, the EU is more advanced on the next step of regulation, in the sense of saying both countries started with a basic registration regime, where basically, firms go to the regulator, present their AML and sanctions program, and get registered. which is different than a license. But with MiCA, you're moving to a licensing regime where you just don't have to demonstrate only that you have an AML program, but you can have to have a fully fledged compliance program. And think of customer protection and segregation of assets and conflicts of interest and consumer, a lot of topics, basically the whole compliance building. And the UK is not there yet. The UK is still at the phase of consultations, how do we do it, and all that. So again, different speeds. We could also talk about different approaches of the regulator and how, some of them set the bar higher and make applications more difficult, but I think that that's a different topic. But at least the topics and the things that are in the agenda are very different. And it's very interesting to see how, one can learn from one to go and apply in the other.
Do you personally see any particular difference in how strict the government and the regulators see crypto, either in France or in the UK? Do you see more of a punitive approach on either side or not really?
Yes, I think that, from where I see things, the UK has taken a much more skeptic approach to the industry. And I talked earlier about, how, for example, the bar when you register seems to be different. In the sense, what I mean is, for example, that the UK regulator takes pride in that statistic about how many applications are withdrawn. And recently they said, 87% of crypto applications are withdrawn, as if that is a good thing.
Yeah.
And one can question that. I think that there's some benefit to that. We have had people seconded to the FCA. We heard and we have seen that that some of the applications are very deficient. But I think that one could argue that having such a high bar at registration means that you have less competition. You have less firms that go through, and you only have the bigger ones that can get through. I think that the French regulator, for example, has taken a more open approach, where they are betting more on the supervision that happens after the registration process. So basically, firms can get through with maybe a slightly lower bar, but it's okay because then the regulator will be supervising them and making sure that they do what they promise to say. So I think that part is very different. Another big difference is, for example, how the UK is really an outlier when it comes to consumer protection. For example, the financial promotions regime, which will be 1 month old in October, is very different from what you see in other countries. These questions about, having a 24-hour cooling off period, the personalized disclaimers and all of that, is much more than what is expected in other countries, where basically it's, look, don't tell stupid stuff, just fair, clear, not misleading, that's it, But here, so much things have been added that I wonder sometimes if that can be a risk for the competitivity of the UK.
I think you touch on a good point, because particularly when it comes to financial promotion, there are so many aspects to keep in mind, and probably the regulator doesn't understand that they automatically slow down the industry, because it's not just a problem for UK player. As you know better than me, are European players that want to advertise in the UK and potentially don't even know about the implication of the financial promotion rule that are affected by it. Just another question to run a bit of a parallelism between France and the UK. When it comes to the time frame to being regulated, there is pretty much an ongoing joke between clients of Semoto that are registering multiple locations of how long it can take them to get up and running. Which one you feel is slightly more not easy to approach, but quick in getting responses and get you regulated?
I think that, to be fair, things have improved UK side. I think that, there was a moment in the UK where, things were taking very long because, there were shortages of staff, and I think that, there was a situation going on, that meant that, that it was difficult for the case officers to get to the applications, etc. And I think that unfortunately created kind of a bad image. I don't think that, there's necessarily a big difference in terms of the time that it takes, to get that first feedback and, and to at least, know which way the application is going. I think that where you may have a little bit of a difference is the type of feedback, that you get, basically. I think that, the French regulator has tended to take a little bit more of a hands-on approach, and basically sometimes they say, look, you should change this, you should change that. The feedback that the FCA gives is a more high-level principles-based one, where say, look, the business-wide risk assessment is deficient, but without going to a lot of details on what they need to correct, because they don't see that that's the rule. And I think that that's a valid position. But I think that like what this points at is that sometimes what we have seen is that firms tend to take a view that they can get a quick and dirty application in, and they don't realize that they're in front of the regulator, and the regulator wants to see serious players in front of them. And they see a lot of applications, and when they start to see, that somebody copied pasted something from one and the other, they see those things. And I think that thinking that you can just do a quick and dirty one and get there in 3 months, and that's going to be it, usually ends up being self-defeating, because you end up on a second round and a third round. And by the time that we get firms come to us, they're already in their second rejection or the third rejection and have burned through 9 months of cash flow. While, if you put the effort and some investment in getting an application right at the beginning, then, you end up eventually even saving some money, because, you can get more chances on your side to get it right from the first go.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Let me ask you one last question about this dualism between France and UK, and then we can move on. Anything that you would like to tell our listeners about new and upcoming rules coming into place, some new regulation kicking in soon that they should be aware of, either in the UK or in France?
I think that in general, the theme that we will see everywhere, not just in the UK and France, is basically, this move from, a focus on AML to what we call holistic compliance. Look, the current registration regimes that you have in the UK and even in France as of now, is focused on AML.
Yeah.
In France you already have a reinforced regime, etc. But basically, the idea is that it all started with AML, because all of this comes from Gafi. When Gafi saw that crypto was a big thing, then they said, look, AML has to be applied to crypto, and that's where all regulators started. But then all of them will eventually have to move to the holistic compliance that applies to TradFi. The EU is doing it faster, with MiCA at the end of the year, but the UK will get there too. And I think that basically that means that that you will have a need of a change of skills in the compliance people that you have in crypto firms, because so far they have been focused on MLROs, basically money laundering reporting officers, financial crime, AML specialists, and now you will need to get people that know about financial promotions, that know about conflicts of interest, that know about market abuse. So basically you're going to get something that is similar to what asset managers, insurers, and brokers, and everybody else is doing in TradFi these days. So it's just a matter of speed, with Europe having a few months of advantage, of head start compared to the UK, but we will all get there. And that's what you see in Dubai, and that's what you see in Hong Kong, and that's what you're seeing in every jurisdiction, basically. Regulators are not going to give a free pass to crypto. Absolutely. That was never going to happen.
Absolutely. We can all agree on that. And with the industry maturing more and more, the figures as well that work in the industry are going to be more and more similar to the one in traditional finance. You're absolutely right. So actually, let's go back to what you were saying before, what Plenitude represent for the industry. A bridge, the capacity of bringing financial company into crypto and vice versa. So let's split the two banks of this imaginary river, and let's start with a traditional financial company. Let's talk about a broker that wants to launch crypto trading, an asset manager that wants to bring into the portfolio crypto assets. As a regulatory consultant, what are the main things that you generally suggest to these players to keep in mind? What any financial institution cannot miss when it comes to crypto?
I think that, when it comes to TradFi firms getting into crypto, it's more of a matter of understanding what are the specific risks of the crypto business model that they want to do, whether it's tokenizing fund shares or investing in crypto assets. It's basically trying to say, it's a different discussion in the sense of saying you don't have to develop an AML policy from scratch. You don't have to develop a due diligence from policy from scratch or a market abuse policy from scratch. They already have one. So it's more of a matter of tweaking. And I think that in that tweaking, you also have a certain discussion that is about, removing kind of these apprehensions about the industry. Because unfortunately, a lot of the discussions with TradFi compliance and risk firms are still starting from the point of crypto is for criminals and it's just a money laundering tool, which is very far from the truth. When you know about the transparency of blockchains and the power of blockchain analytics tools and and all of these risk mitigation techniques that we have, but those are not very well known outside of the crypto sphere. So a lot of the times, the discussion is first, look, it's okay. Crypto is not just for criminals. You have this, you have this, you have this, and you can monitor the transactions, and it's actually a terrible tool for criminals. So then there's that education part, and then there's that question, okay, good. Now that we are past this and we're ready to embark in the crypto journey, then let's try to see, yes, indeed, there are some crypto specific risks. So let's see how we mitigate them, So if you're going to be taking, client funds that are in stable coins, for example, okay, let's learn how to screen a wallet for risk. Let's put in place a procedure for how to investigate the alerts that the blockchain analytics tools that you choose are going to give you. Let's upskill the team so that they know how to interpret the information that they get from a blockchain analytics tool, because that's going to be very different. But the principles themselves, the principle about, adopting a risk-based approach, doing a risk assessment, scoring the risk of customers, analyzing alerts, documenting that, they're not very dissimilar. So the discussion is a little bit different. Again, it's one of education and tweaks, rather than starting from scratch.
Understood. And I guess both worlds have to face this adjustment. None are going to have all the policy in place. Nobody's going to have a full trained team. Education, it probably comes first. So now let's talk about the other face of the coin, that are the crypto native one. As you mentioned, regulation is not going anywhere. We all know that it's only going to get even more intense. But that also brings a barrier to entrance, because all of a sudden, a lot of these companies, a lot of startups, we know plenty of young entrepreneurs, young founders with great ideas, but not much budget. And all of a sudden they realize that there are costs in order to go live with their project. And they're all associated with more and more regulation. So what I would like to do is to kind of demystify a little bit and reduce the scaremongering that there is in the industry. That is, it makes it almost pointless to start a project because there is so much regulation. I don't think it's the case, but I would love to pass the ball to you. So please give us a roadmap from a founder point of view, a company in crypto entering the space. What do they have to do to be compliant? Is getting regulated the first stage, or they need to put together some policy and framework first?
Well, I would say that, both go hand in hand. I mean, of course, it all depends, whether you need to get registered or licensed, depending on the country. Depends on the activity that you're doing. So I think that one of the first things is to, assess that, some activities like exchanging from fiat to crypto or custodying for third parties, always need to get registered or regulated. But there are some activities that may not need to, So I think that, that's one of those first things, is saying, okay, does my business model involve an activity that needs regulation, that needs me to get registered? But let's assume that it does. And in that case, basically, registration or licensing involves designing a compliance and control framework, and involves policies, procedures, systems, controls, oversight, monitoring, MI, reporting, etc. It's kind of a nice little neat building, with a lot of first level controls, second level controls, etc. And I guess that, basically regulators, when assessing an application, expect to see that building, basically saying, okay, good. It's not just writing a document. It's writing a document and then providing for some measures to make sure that those documents are applied. And then when you find issues from the controls to ensure that you put in place to implement those policies and procedures, or to check that they have been correctly implemented, how do you make sure that the issues are addressed? How you make sure that your governance body knows about those issues and that they know what's going on in the company. So it's, all that design of the control framework needs to be done, because basically that's what you're telling the regulator. You're telling them, look, this is how my framework is going to work. It goes beyond just writing a procedure. It's all of those things that go after that, because it's a living document, it's a living framework. And that requires time and that requires investment. It's not a tick in the box. And I think that, to be fair, a lot of founders get by now that regulation is the price to pay for adoption. The road to adoption goes through regulation, because the services that the industry provides are not very different from the ones that are provided by asset managers or brokers or insurers, etc. So it's going to be similar. And I think that the earlier that a founder understands that is just compliance is a part of the business, just like business development, just like tech, just like any of the other aspects of it, then the sooner that they can integrate that, and the sooner they can see compliance as an investment rather than just a cost. And I think that I think that that's kind of the mind shift that is needed, basically, so that they can plan ahead and say, okay, I need to build this. Better to get it right from the beginning rather than just doing after being rejected by the regulator twice, for example.
Great advice, absolutely.
Or even worse, after getting in the crosshairs of a regulator and basically getting into an enforcement action, which is just a different thing.
Agreed. I'll break the next question into three parts. That one is a bit of a chicken and egg problem, but let's say that Semoto wants to get regulated. What, as a consultant, what generally Plenitude suggests? Let's apply for the regulation because it takes a certain amount of time, and let's start working on everything that needs to be put in place, or let's put the application through once we have everything in place. And the second question would be, give us just an idea of what are the basic requirements for a company to have in place before applying.
So, I mean, this will look a little bit different in different countries, because, again, if we do the exercise in the UK, we're still talking about regulation that is basically about, like money laundering and also how you're complying with travel rule and financial promotions, because they're already in place. But it's relatively a smaller scope. If you're doing that in France today, you are already starting to anticipate, all of those topics that MiCA brings, like consumer protection or, segregation of assets or market abuse, or, like basically it's a wider range of topics. But I think that in both cases, again, once you have done an assessment and, and sometimes that involves, some legal advice, to say, okay, does my activity fall in the scope? What you're showing to the regulator is basically that that you're willing and you're organized to have this work, because a lot of times the company is not operational, or is not able to operate without the registration. So basically, it's very much based on the design of the framework, and that's why the policies and procedures are important. You're basically saying, look, this is how I intend this to work. At that stage, you cannot show if it actually works in practice. So it's very much a forward-looking thing. So you need to have in place the basics. And that means, having the documents, having the policies and the procedures, an idea of how they're going to work, an idea of what are going to be the tools. But if you're not operational, you're not operational. And it's just judged on the basis of those policies and procedures. However, you need to ensure that, that you can stand by those policies and procedures. And as soon as you're able to operate, you're ready to have them operate from day one. That's what is being asked.
Got it. Thanks for that. Thanks for clarifying that. So we already looked at the point of view of financial companies moving into the space. We analyze what crypto founders should keep in mind. I will ask you again to dig deeper a little bit from the founder point of view. I would like you to give some advice to these guys that are listening to us. But before doing that, just to make even more clear the importance of it, I always ask our guests to tell us some horror stories, because people respond better when they understand the gravity of the situation. Give us an idea, obviously without disclosing a name, but what can go wrong if the regulatory framework is not done properly? Have you seen fine already coming through by either a regulator in France or in the UK? What type of action can be taken if mistakes are made?
Yeah, I think that the main mistake is not to learn from others' mistakes. I think that we already have a lot of history in terms of enforcement action in the industry. The
Apologies for
horror stories. I mean, everybody
interrupting
knows.
you. There is a bit of a background noise with your microphone. I don't know if it's scratching against something.
I think I was playing with my pen.
No worries, no worries. Please
It's
go ahead.
probably no. So I think that exactly. Learning from others' mistake. Is an important thing, because one thing that I think is an absolute mine of information is enforcement actions. And regulators generally, when they take enforcement action against a firm, they publish a long document saying, look, this is what happened, this is our assessment of the facts, these were the violations of the rules, and this is the fine. And the fine can go to billions, and everybody knows the Binance case, about, like, forgot how many billions there were already, but, and there's many of those, and a lot of big players have been fined like that, whether it's for sanctions failures, whether it's for money laundering failures, or fraud failures. But what, in particular, sanctions and AML, when you read those decisions, they're extremely useful, because they tell, look, the rules expect this, and you didn't do it. You didn't investigate the alerts. You didn't carry out enhanced due diligence. You didn't put geo-blocking in place to block Russian citizens from accessing your website. And it's basically a very good, to-do list of, okay, I need to be aware of these pitfalls and not fall into them. So that's very useful, because, it gives you a lot of what regulators expect. And of course, those who don't, we have seen the stories, I mean, in France, there was a case of a firm that was registered, and 1 year later, they were kicked off. They lost the registration because it was just so egregiously bad, for example. In the US, you have seen millions and millions of dollars of fine. So I think that that's the biggest mistake. I think that we can also learn from other sectors. One thing that we have seen in our practice a lot is that, for example, the UK regulator is going after e-money institutions, for example. And there's a lot of enforcement actions against e-money institutions. And that's a sector that is very close to crypto. E-money, payment services, etc. It's very close to what we do. So I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from those. Basically, when those actions arrive, it's okay, what can I learn from these industries? Because the principles that we need to apply, once again, are not different to the ones that those industries need to apply. So there's lessons in what happens to the banks, there's lessons in what happens to the insurers, there's lessons in what happens to e-money institutions, there's lessons in what happens to other crypto firms in other countries. And I think that, all of the information is public. And one mistake is to think that, that's never going to happen to me. It's keeping an ear to the ground and basically trying to learn from that.
That's great advice. Thanks for that. Last question. Let's go back to what we were discussing before. Give the audience an advice on what a new founder should do. Like a couple of steps of let's assume the case that they know that they ask for legal advice, as you mentioned, and this is important. Company like Plenitude, great consulting companies, works hand in hand with law firms to assess if somebody needs or not to be regulated. But so let's start from the assumption that a crypto business needs to be regulated. What's next? What advice would you have for founders?
No, I think that it's reiterating a little bit of the theme that has flowed through all of this, which is basically regulation is a big deal. It's part of the package of promoting your products and services. It's very close to financial services. It will be regulated. It is being regulated like financial services, and compliance is not just a cost. It's an investment, and it's a way to doing the proper thing by your clients. Basically, it's a way to showing that you care. I mean, I think that we care for our clients by giving them great products. Crypto is a great product that solves for a lot of things, but it also has to protect customers, and the way to have that technology benefit customers is not just by promoting the price gains or anything like that. It's also promoting something that is safe, that talks about the risks, and giving proper information, and basically enabling our customers to make informed decisions, and to doing everything that we can to avoid this bad rep that our industry gets for facilitating financial crime, because we have the tools not facilitate financial crime. So it's basically it's like leading by example and showing that that it's possible to do it. It's possible to market a great product while being compliant and while protecting consumers at the same time.
Completely agree. And let's not forget that being
And there's matters to do it intelligently.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you're right. And being regulated is and properly regulated is a marketing tool, especially even when it comes to raising investments. You give your investors more a sense of credibility, a sense of trustworthiness. So being properly structured and regulated is quite important. I lied. I have one more question for you because they just came to my mind. You're in a great position because you serve two countries at the same time. Where do you see the majority of the applications? So which ecosystem you see more active at the moment? You see more application in the UK or in France?
France has a bigger ecosystem. I think I haven't checked the lists in a while, but the UK has been stuck at 45 since I think February when the last one was approved. I think France already has more than 100. I would expect that that they keep going ahead because you have more regulatory clarity. You have a regulator that has been playing that game of openness a little bit more. What will be interesting is basically who emerges on top. In this fight within EU countries to be the center. Because there you have France, Luxembourg, Ireland. All getting some big names. You have other countries that have thousands of firms, but they're usually smaller firms. I think that it will be interesting to see, whether it's France, Ireland, the Netherlands. I think that will be an interesting one. But yeah, so far I have to say that the UK doesn't seem to be keeping up, and let's hope that things change. I think that it will be everybody benefits if you have kind of this healthy competition with different jurisdictions doing their best to attract customers without it being a race to the bottom, but with it being quality regulation that creates confidence, that attracts good firms, and I think that that there's no reason why the UK couldn't catch up.
No, absolutely, and you're right. I mean, it is a race, but it doesn't have to be a race to the bottom. It will be interesting to see which country emerge. Obviously, things are changing and are changing quickly on the other side of the pond, meaning in the US. It was slow in the race, but people have a feeling that things are going to change, and they're going to change quickly. So it's important in Europe, UK, Switzerland, they step up into their game. Awesome. Manuel, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for all the insightful information. Where are the Semoto audience are going to be able to see you next? Are you attending any events?
Yes, there's next week there's the European Blockchain Convention in Barcelona. We'll be attending that, and and we also try to kind of be regular attendees at crypto UK events in the UK or ADAM events in France. There's other things coming up, Brussels. We have an interesting event where I'll be speaking on financial crime and crypto in December in London. So we can definitely follow us, sign up for newsletters, etc., and you will get everything about where we are.
And as always, I'm going to post under the podcast link the profile link in Semoto for Plenitude, where you're going to find all the information about the company, about Manuel, the service that they provide, and more importantly also events that is going to attend, material that has been created by Plenitude. Manuel, thanks again. Thanks for taking the time, and have a great week. Bye.
Thank you so much, Marco. It was good to see you.
Bye.
Take care.